welcome everybody to this webinar called Education for Sustainable Development in Practice, Tips from Educators. My name is Alicia Jimenez. I work as Director of Programs of Earth Charter International and Earth Charter Center for Education for Sustainable Development, which is the organization that is organizing this webinar. We are based at the University for Peace in Costa Rica. And we are doing this webinar as well in collaboration with the UniTwin Network on ESD and Social Transformation, where the UNESCO chair that we coordinate on Education for Sustainable Development and the Earth Charter is a part of. So we consider that it's very important to open spaces for teachers and university professors to share and learn about how education for sustainability can be put into practice and get inspiration from concrete actions in different contexts. So that's why we are here. We're opening the space for us to get inspired. So for this, well, we do this type of open webinars, but also we try to organize courses. We are also doing publications, and I'm very happy to share that one of our well-recognized capacity building programs on education for sustainable development will start in January 2025. Is the online certificate program on ESD. So you'll find the link in the chat soon in case you are interested or you know people who will be interested in this. So before we start, let me see. Give me a second. Case. Okay, so we have Chris Jackson here. It's great to have you. So hi, Chris. So before we hear the panelists of today, there is a special recognition we are offering today to a school that has gone through the Earth Charter and ESD School Seal process and has achieved the champion level or 3 level. So here in the audience, we have Chris Jackson, who is the head teacher of Avonwood School. So this is a good moment for us to give this recognition. Let me share the screen just a moment so you can see what I'm talking about. This is recognition that we are offering to Avonwood School. They have done amazing work putting sustainability into action with an ethical perspective. So we're very happy that, and we are also inspired by all the actions that Avonwood School does. So it's a big applause and a big congratulations to Avonwood School for the work. And I would like to ask Chris if you can open your mic and tell us, well, why is Avonwood School so special? What makes you proud of your school?
Oh, thank you so much for the lovely intro and for inviting us today as well. It feels a real privilege and an honour to be here, everybody. So thank you so much for having us, and to have been awarded that champion tree level is just wonderful news. I'm sure lots of the colleagues on the call here are associated with the Earth Charter in different ways and in different places around the world. Avonwood Primary School for a lot of time, I think, has been the kind of standout school probably in the UK in terms of affiliation with the Earth Charter. We're 10 years old as a primary school. I feel very lucky as a head teacher. It was a new build primary, and from the very beginning, the Little Earth Charter values have been our school principles, and that has just set us up really for a wonderful little future as a primary school. And I think in terms of that kind of social ethos and kind of the morals that come around being part of the Earth Charter, it fits so beautifully with a primary school. Got nearly 500 children on roll here at Avonwood. Our little school motto on all of our badges is "It starts with one," and I think that ties so beautifully with the Earth Charter. We've got a poem in our reception that's inspired by our Earth Charter values as well. And it's all about, if all of us make those little differences, the power of the collective coming together. And it's just created a little army of very, very inspired young people. So I'm incredibly grateful to the Earth Charter organisation, really, for helping Avonwood become the school that it is today. As a little example of some of the things that we do across the school, when you walk onto our drive, it's a little bit like Hogwarts. We've got flags down the drive with all the little Earth Charter values. So as soon as you're coming onto site, you can see that affiliation with the Earth Charter is there. We've started having Earth Charter Days, so we wanted to celebrate the principles of Earth and life a couple of weeks ago. So all 500 children, including the teachers and myself, came to school dressed as penguins. We did a March of the Penguins Day, but we underpinned it with some really powerful learning linked to climate change as well. And whether that was children doing their own little research news articles on a blue screen and it looking like they were in the Antarctic, or whether it was children in Year 5 creating beautiful little sculptures of penguins, we find that the Earth Charter just threads through really beautifully with what we're doing here as a school. I feel like having gone through the process, I'm now much better aware of the scale of the Earth Charter, really. And although I'm really proud of the work that we've done as a primary school, I feel like there's still so much more to do. And that's a really exciting thing to be part of too. So hopefully that tells you a little bit about Avonwood. Very grateful for being here this afternoon. And just thank you so much for that recognition as well. Very exciting.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for inspiring us. And I could just picture everybody dressed as penguins, and so lovely, so lovely. And so thank you. Yeah, I share in the chat box, if you can find it, a link to the story that we just wrote for all of you. So you can download it and read about it if you're very interested. And of course, Avonwood Primary School is very active in social media, and they have a very nice web page. They're also an eco school, and they have so many awards more. So you can learn more about them in the
I'm
maybe
very
Chris,
happy
if
to be in touch.
you can maybe share in the chat some of the
Yeah,
links of
yeah. I'll pop
of the
my email
school
address in there if there's
and your
anybody
email.
help. More than happy to chat to anybody. Thank you so
Oh,
much.
wonderful. Okay, thank you. Okay, so now we have the pleasure to have two speakers with very interesting experiences as well. So I'm sure we'll learn a lot. So without further ado, let's going to give the space for both of them. But just to tell you a little bit about how it's going to be the dynamics of today, and in this interest of time, we'll hear both of them. And while they speak, you can make comments or questions in the chat box. So this will also allow all of us to reflect on both experiences, and help us to also reflect on how to transform education to address better our current issues. So they're going to bring two different perspectives, and so maybe we can start making links while we hear them. And then after we hear both of them, we'll have a time to give the floor to some of you and to give comments and questions, etc. Okay, so we are going to start with Kirsten Lisk. She is the project manager of connecting platforms and learning for sustainability of Scotland at the Moray House School of Education and Sport, IETL, of the University of Edinburgh. So welcome, Kirsten. So we're going to now pass the floor to you, and we'll look forward to hearing you.
Thank you so much, Alicia. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Okay, I'm just going to share my screen if that's all right. Okay, well, a warm hello to everyone who's joined today, and I'm delighted to be here to be sharing some thoughts with you this afternoon. I'm Kirsten Leask from Learning for Sustainability Scotland. We are Scotland's United Nations University recognised regional centre of expertise in education for sustainable development. And we're part of a global network of similar centres across the world. There are about 190 centres like us globally, bringing together policymakers, educators, learners, anyone and everyone who has a responsibility for or an interest in learning for sustainability. So over the past few decades, as we know, there's been a plethora of frameworks, of policy statements, guidance, and declarations that have emerged to provide support and direction towards a more sustainable regenerative path for humanity and our interaction with each other and with the more than human world. And each of these is obviously just one thread in this wonderful global tapestry. And over the next 20 minutes, I'd like to share a little bit more about some of the threads that we're weaving here in Scotland when it comes to one of the most powerful tools that we have with regard to a sustainable future, which is obviously education. I'm going to share a little bit more about the policy context here and some examples of how our learners and educators are increasingly weaving this across learning as a whole setting approach. So first of all, I'd like to start with a holistic policy overview, if you like. What I'm showing you now is Scotland's National Performance Framework from the Scottish Government, refreshed in 2018, and really just to sort of set the scene in the fact that sustainability is important here in Scotland. This is the blueprint for all government strategy and spending, and it's underpinned by the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And each of these 11 national outcomes that you see here align to several different SDGs, with Goal 5, gender equality, aligned to all of them. And as you can see at the bottom there, just on the right slightly, the purple outcome there, education has its own outcome, but it in turn influences and is influenced by other outcomes. I put the hyperlink there if you'd like to find out more about this framework in terms of what it does. So what does this mean for educators and learners in Scotland? Well, first of all, I'd like to take you back to 2012, when what we now know as Learning for Sustainability in Scotland was starting to take shape. And the text that you see before you is from a report by the One Planet Schools Working Group. And this built on an existing suite of policy developed over the previous decades and outlined an ambition for learning and education in Scotland, which took a holistic approach. The way in which it gave consideration as to how sustainable development education, global citizenship, and outdoor learning could be woven together to support other high-level educational priorities, such as raising attainment, improving behaviour, supporting inclusion, and promoting health and well-being. But a core aspect of this approach was to make sure that it did not ask anything of educators that was not already implied by our existing curriculum, the Curriculum for Excellence, and also the professional standards for teachers from our General Teaching Council for Scotland. It didn't propose a new initiative, a new scheme, or an award. Its recommendations were about strategic change that created an enabling framework, removed barriers, and built on existing excellent practice. And its ultimate intention was to ensure that learning for sustainability is experienced in a transformative way by every learner across every 3 to 18 educational setting in Scotland. So how do we define learning for sustainability in Scotland? Well, the terminology might be new, but it's not a new approach. Many educational establishments and educators have been embedding this kind of learning and educating in their practice for many years. And essentially, it's a whole setting approach that enables the school and its wider community to look at learning holistically, engaging hearts, hands, and heads to build the values, the attitudes, the knowledge, the skills, and the confidence needed to develop practices and take decisions which are compatible with a sustainable and equitable society. It's not a timetable subject. It's about embedding an ethos that's woven through all aspects of learning. And it brings together, as I say, the historically key areas of education for sustainable development and global citizenship, with outdoor learning as a key pedagogical approach to promote this socially just and equitable future for all. And perhaps most importantly, the term learning for sustainability must not be understood to relate exclusively or solely to the environment and green issues, so-called. We use sustainability in the way that it is understood by UN agencies and countries across the world to incorporate the inextricable links between environmental, social, cultural, and economic issues. So in summary, learning for sustainability, and the important word there is for, not about, is the process of developing the skills, the values, the knowledge, and the attributes that are needed to move from where we are now to a state of sustainability where we live within the environmental limits of our planet in a just and equitable society. And it's really important to note that what we found is that learning which simply develops knowledge, understanding, and skills is not enough. The values that learners attach to this knowledge and their attitudes to applying these skills are of huge importance. Learning about sustainability in ways that don't address values and attitudes isn't, in our experience, either learning for sustainability or indeed effective practice. So how are we embedding it in Scottish educational policy? Well, in Scotland, we take a strategic national approach. The first and most important aspect of this is that learning for sustainability has the status of an entitlement. It's an entitlement for all of our learners in the 3 to 18 age range. It's about a whole setting approach, and it's the responsibility of all practitioners. It's part of our whole setting self-evaluation process, and it's a core part of the professional standards for teachers that teachers must meet to be registered as a teacher in Scotland. It's woven across our curriculum, and when we embed it in our settings, it's about the place and the space as well as the learning itself and how these intertwine. And essentially, it can be summed up as this idea of 4 C's: the culture of the setting, the campus, the physical and digital space in which we work, the curriculum, and the idea of community. And it's most effective when it's delivered as a whole setting approach that creates coherent, rewarding, and transformative learning experiences. Scotland's refreshed Learning for Sustainability Action Plan, this Target 2030, a movement for people, planet, and prosperity, which was published in 2023, aims to build an inspiring movement for change so that every 3 to 18 place of education becomes a sustainable learning setting by 2030. And we frame this through these 4 C's. And there's a descriptor there underneath as to what we mean by a sustainable learning setting. It's about every aspect of the learning context. It's about what we teach and learn, how we manage our space, how people relate to each other in the space, how they work with the local community, and how they reach out to the wider world. So what I'd like now is to look at some of the key elements for effective implementation for each of these 4 C's in turn. And the reflections I'm going to share with you are a summary of some of the many conversations that we've had with educators, with learners, with school leaders, with communities and policymakers. And we thank them for their input over the years. So what I'd like to do, as I say, is to go through each of the 4 C's. And then I'm going to give you an example of how one of our schools is making this happen. So the first one, culture, which is perhaps one of probably the most important of the 4 C's in that it drives all other activity in a setting. These are just some of the key elements that people have identified as being of particular interest or particular importance when designing this idea of a culture that embeds learning for sustainability. Leadership and structures, very much this idea that being a whole setting approach is not a job for one single passionate LFS champion. It requires collective responsibility, supported by leadership at all levels, from learners to families to staff to school leaders. And a really open participatory ethos is essential if we're going to unlock the passion and creativity of everybody. We need effective structures within the setting, school committees, planning time, learner groups, links with other groups outside the setting too. The ethos and values are essential if people are to contribute effectively and LFS is to flourish. Values are central to all activities and to the life of the school, and they need to be explicit and constantly reinforced. Learner voice is absolutely crucial. Ensuring effective participation and learner voice is, however, as we know, no easy task. So moving beyond this idea of a hand-picked sort of small number of learners or young people who have volunteered to be part of this, to a truly inclusive atmosphere where all young people are enabled to have their voices heard. Planning and decision making, a coherent whole-setting approach isn't going to happen by accident, and it needs to be planned for. And what we find is that learning for sustainability is increasingly becoming a lens through which schools are joining up seemingly disparate policy and strategy requirements. One of our local authority contacts described it as a golden thread that is being woven across lots of different aspects of what schools need to deliver on a statutory basis. And this last element of around practitioner professionalism. Provision needs to be made for career-long professional learning for staff in order to help build and maintain capacity, understanding, and confidence. The next C is campus, and this is this idea of a shared responsibility between those who work and learn in the setting and those that manage and own the school estate. So how can we use the space, both the physical space to support LFS activities and learning, but also this idea of the online space, the digital space. How can that be used as a place to explore and embed sustainability? Looking at all of the policies that sit within our schools and learning settings. How are we procuring our energy or our paper or our transport, for example? But also looking at ways in which non-teaching staff can be part of the shared vision as well. We've seen some wonderful work, for example, with school catering teams who are using food served in the school canteen as a means of exploring aspects of sustainability. The next one, obviously, is curriculum. And if learning for sustainability is to flourish and people are to receive their entitlement to learning for sustainability, then it needs to be embedded across the curriculum and feature in the day-to-day experience of learners. It's too important to be delivered solely through a lunchtime club for a few fortunate learners or in an isolated off-timetable experience. And this word cloud has been available to Scottish schools for many years, and it's provided inspiration for them to help to begin or develop their learning for sustainability journeys by outlining just some of the many starting points and stimuli for dialogue that could be considered across the curriculum. But it's very much this idea of it not being a one-size-fits-all approach. It's something that should reflect and enhance the particular needs, circumstances, and opportunities in each setting. But of ultimate importance is the consideration of the learner and the experiences that they'll have access to as they move through the 3 to 18 continuum of learning. Finally, community, this idea of your community as an asset, using the LFS capital, if you like, already in the setting and the wider community to share skills and knowledge. Bringing that intergenerational aspect to life, helping young people engage with everyone around them. This idea of learning through doing, bringing families into the mix and tackling social isolation and ensuring equity of access, but also recognising the many definitions of community, not just geographical, but cultural, faith-based, interest-based, and ultimately this idea of us as global citizens of an international community as well. So very quickly, for the last couple of minutes, I'm very sorry that I've slightly gone over time. I just want to share a little bit more about how one of our settings has been taking action on this. And I've included a hyperlink there to a recording of them talking through this, if you'd like to know more about what they said. So how they embedded this, it all started with a small group of 10 young change makers who wanted to make a difference in their community of Duns, which is a small town in the south of Scotland. And they worked with staff to share a vision of change and also with local community organisations to join them as they embarked on community-based projects. The children began to find their voices and they became involved in real-life, authentic learning experiences. At the same time, they began to move beyond environmental concerns to link their work to the UN Sustainable Development Goals and the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. They also achieved their EcoSchools Green Flag accreditation, and this inspired their head teacher to research and find out more about learning for sustainability. And she came across research by Scotland's Children's Parliament and the University of Dundee, which helped her to look at ways in which she could enable and embed this more successfully. She herself had also begun a postgraduate course with the University of Edinburgh to develop a strategic approach to head teacher leadership. And as part of that, she decided to make learning for sustainability the focus of her studies. And she began to look at the policy landscape, both nationally and globally. Scotland's currently undergoing a period of significant educational reform, and some of this research helped this head teacher to identify how this golden thread of learning for sustainability could not just weave only across much of what was being recommended in these policy reports, but also support what she and her setting were planning to do around learning for sustainability. So as part of that, they identified 3 key strands on which they wanted to work. And this was developed cooperatively by the young people, teaching staff, non-teaching staff, and the wider community. So the first was this idea of curriculum innovation and design, a curriculum that was co-created by the children and the staff that interwove themes of learning for sustainability. The second was the idea of professional learning and pedagogy, a professional learning pathway to make sure that all staff had the skills and confidence and knowledge required to make learning for sustainability part of the everyday. And the final was this idea of children as change agents, children having agency and autonomy, leading authentic real-world sustainability experiences and initiatives. The first strand included teaching sessions, bringing non-teaching staff into the mix. It included looking at ways in which they could measure the impact of what they were doing and bringing it into their school improvement planning process, but also bringing in families and wider community as part of this idea of enhancing curriculum innovation. The second, this idea of looking at professional learning, the first thing they did was an audit of where staff were on their learning for sustainability journey. What did they need to make it happen? So they gathered lots of different views, ensuring that everyone's voice was heard. They then signposted to learning. They had regular check-ins. They had regular sessions where they learned together as a staff team. And the third, excuse me, this idea of children as change agents was the creation with the children of 3 key leadership groups, with each pupil in the school part of one of those groups. Pupils were brought together to collaborate as a group and celebrate their work through things like newsletters, whole school assemblies, displays of what was happening. Finally, her top tips as a teacher, as a head teacher leading this learning as to what makes it happen, what you need to embed a whole setting approach to learning for sustainability, was the first of all to think about why your setting wants to do this and what exactly your specific needs are. As I said previously, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It's about the needs and opportunities within your setting. Identification of key people from all aspects of the setting and its wider community. Making sure it's robustly embedded into your school improvement planning process, so it's part of the strategic vision of the school. But making sure that the young people are leading the learning, this idea of the change agent. Bringing in the community, the wider family engagement, and making sure that professional learning is available for all staff to support and upskill and ensure momentum throughout the process. So finally, in terms of learning for sustainability in Scotland, it's not an optional add-on for individual educators. It's an approach to life and learning that is embedded across all learning and teaching. And it's for everyone engaged in education to play their part, whether you're staff, learner, local community, local authority, national bodies and government. Thank you very much for listening to me and allowing me to go slightly over time. Thank you.
No, not at all. We were really, you're on time, I'm pretty sure. And thank you so much, Kirsten. It was so interesting, everything. I will have to hold myself because I would like to say so many things, but we don't have that much time. And I want to also hear to Donnie, but I just want to mention very quickly that we are now currently going through a course is on education for sustainable development and global citizenship. I think there's some of our participants here, and we are just going through the whole school approach part. And so everything that you just said, I'm like, oh, just taking screenshots, etc., because it's so interesting. And we'll talk about that later. But thank you for the insights. And I think for us as well, it's very good to see like many of these theoretical aspects that we talk about, education for sustainability and global citizenship, but now in a context, like grounded in a place and being alive. So that's wonderful. I think for many of us, it's wonderful to hear this example. But we'll talk more, and I'm sure many of you, if you have more questions, will open the floor. But now it's time to hear Donnie, who's here, Donnie Hale from the US. He'll tell us more a bit about where he is now, but he serves as the Vice President of Innovation and Growth for the Institute for Educational Leadership in the US. And Donnie, the floor is yours, and also tell us a little bit where you are and about this the work that this institute does. Thank you.
Good. Good morning, everyone. My name is Donnie Hale. I'm the Vice President for Innovation and Growth for the Institute for Educational Leadership. We call it IEL for short. And so excited to be here. I'm actually calling in from, I'm currently in Minneapolis, Minnesota. But my home base where I live is near Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And so the great thing, it's unfortunate that we've had a lot of climate change and impacts due to hurricane, but for me and my community, we were spared. And so our hearts go out to other parts of our state and the people in our state, as well as in North Carolina and other parts of the South, because they were definitely impacted by recent hurricanes. And so definitely excited to be here. Before I get started, I want to say thank you to Alicia and Marian for this opportunity. I think it's a wonderful platform for educators from around the world to come together around things that matter. Because I fundamentally believe in order to create sustainable education, we need to figure out how we create platforms for people to exchange ideas, have meaningful discussion, and also be able to challenge each other's assumptions about what works. Because what we're learning is that, place matters. The other part, before I get started, I definitely want to congratulate Chris Jackson for his body of work. And again, it's great to see educators doing incredible work, but a couple of things caught my attention that really helped me to lead into what I'm going to talk about. I think what you said was the power of collective coming together. And so that is a wonderful idea, because really we know, and what we know from our work at IEL and the coalition is that people most closest to the situation have the solutions. While it's important to have expertise and people with letters after their names and doctors and all those things, is that there are local leaders and local participants that also are solution makers. And so again, Chris, great job for the work that you do, because you're right, collective people coming together really make the world better for children, families, and adults to thrive. So thank you for the work that you're doing. So again, I'm going to talk about this idea of community schools. And when we think about education for sustainable development, we think about really hyper-local solutions. IEL for the last 60 years has been a think tank in Washington, D.C., where policymakers, decision makers, educators, but people that really work on the intersection. When I say intersection, I really mean around education, healthcare, the policy, economic development, and housing come together to talk about things that matter. But where we have really created our space at IEL is recognizing that everyone in the world will touch a school at some point. So the power of a school is pretty impactful and revolutionary. The idea is, how do we create structures in order for that voice to be heard? So I'm going to talk about really 5 things. I'm going to walk through really the mission of our vision and mission, the landscape of community schools, the community school model, collaborative leadership, and then as Alicia said, we'll have time at the end for conversations. So high level, and just for you to think about it, and again, I'm with incredible educators, so I know that you all can read. But here's what we hope for, was we hope for a society that uses all of its resources efficiently. When we think about the well-being of children, families, and adults, we want to recognize that we want everyone to be contributing members of a democracy. We want everyone to have a voice. We want them to be able to participate. But again, even as I listen to Kirsten, is that head, heart, and hands exist for everyone. And while we may have different ability groups, is that everyone can be a contributor. Furthermore, we have a vision that unites schools, families, and communities for all to feel they belong, work together, and thrive. We want to really have a vision where people come together, but even more that they recognize that they have a place to come together. And our way of doing that to move to action is using community schools. Is that we recognize that schools become the centers of their neighborhood that allow you to coordinate relationships and resources that lead to the well-being of students, healthier families, and stronger communities. And so we try to make it really simple. And again, I come from a background of higher education where I spent the last 22 years thinking about problems, but I know sometimes as educators, we get focused on problems, but we have to also recognize that there's a lot of solutions. And we have to try things and we have to progress, and we can always look at continuous improvement as a way of moving forward. So when we think about this body of work of community schools, really our mission is very explicit. We want to transform public schools into community schools to unite families and communities for the well-being of children and families. And so when we think about this body of work, it continues to grow. Community schools, for many people, are not new. It starts with Jane Hole in the early 1900s in Chicago. We look at the work of John Dewey with experiential learning. But even more when we look at some of the civil rights movement, is that people were coming together around things that matter. And while schools were always equal for everyone, the idea was to create equitable places where people could learn and come together. And so thinking about why place matters. So when looking at the national landscape, is currently, we say there's about 5,500 community schools, for which people are calling it that. There can be anywhere to about 7,500. And when I think about that, I'll explain what that is in a minute. But the growing movement of community schools is taking heed. About 10 years ago, the federal government created a full service community school grant. The United States federal government, Department of Education, created a full service community school grant, and there was about $5 million. At this point in 2024, there's $178 million for federal grants to support community school development. Now, that is not, while that appears to be a lot, the movement of community schools and this ethos for the work, there's now states supporting community schools. So there's roughly now about $400 million in states across our country supporting community schools. So there's money from a federal level, there's money from a state level, but there's also funding from philanthropic dollars. The idea, again, of community schools is around people coming together, and you'll hear me talk about, we don't need more programs, we need more people working together. Again, I'm gonna use Chris's word, for a collective strategy. Because sometimes what we recognize in the US is that we can go into a school and there could be 40 different partners and people are not working together for a common good. So how do you facilitate change if everyone's moving in different directions? So the idea is, let's not do more programs, but let's create collective strategies for people to come together around a common vision and mission in order for us to monitor and track performance. So with that being said, I want to get down to really the idea of what is a community school. And so when we think about this, a community school is a strategy. It's not a program. And so again, I always say, let's get away from the idea of, and again, we as people, especially in the US, we love programs and services. We love to buy curriculum. Like we love to buy something that we can just plug and play. But here's another way of looking at it. If we move from just programs to strategy, is now community schools become a hyper-local engagement strategy that creates and coordinates opportunities with public schools to accelerate student success. So that means thinking about the common metrics, whether it's academic performance, behavior, or course performance, to think about how we engage families. But the point of community school is using that as a vehicle for hyper-local decision-making that responds to the unique needs of each community. Once you've seen one, you've only seen one because they really are unique to the community. They're unique to culture, to perspective, and to values, but it also is a way of bringing people together around things that matter. And so before I get into this, I come into this space from being an educator in higher education, but also 10 years ago, I left a faculty role in Wisconsin to move to Miami, Florida, where I launched a community school strategy with colleagues into an urban community over town, which is essentially a part of Miami. And so historically, this place was called, Black Miami. That from the 1890s, it was a place for African Americans, also those that are experiencing poverty, lived in this community. In that community, there was an elementary, middle, and high school. And so there was roughly about 5,000 citizens or people living in the community attending, again, we call it a feeder pattern going from elementary, middle, and high school. And so in that community, there was a lot of change taking place. People were transient, people were moving, but there was a lot of nonprofits. Prior to 2014, when we got there, there was also about $140 million of philanthropic investment going in that community with a 10% return on investment. In other words, there was a lot of money. There was a lot of resources. But what we recognized is that people weren't working together. And so what we did was that we just began to listen to people. We began to convene people around things that matter and said, what would change look like if we worked together? What would it look like if we were able to really create communication? And we began to create a path forward for how we could work together. And so with that being said, I'm going to share with the idea of really a community school is really about using neighborhood wisdom to transform systems. So starting from left to right, here's what we know. And again, I would venture to say, you know these things too, is that within the context of neighborhood, there's wisdom, wealth, and will. In other words, people have a history, people have a skill set, and even more, people have a desire to see something better. Although, many people on this call have credentials after name and they're professional, is that sometimes the uncredentialed expert are also the experts that can really navigate a lot of things that we're trying to do. And so here's the big thought, is that people will come together around things for children and for children. Families' lived experiences come together for children. Furthermore, when we think about how we can allocate resources, we can increase opportunities for children and families to thrive. But here's the major thing for us, is that we don't just want to do handouts. Because when you hand out, you keep people as beneficiaries of services, as opposed to them being contributors and leaders in their community. Again, what I said before, people most closest to the problem should be also part of the solution. The way we frame this is that a community school is a place where people can come together to connect, communicate, and collaborate. In the context of a school, is that children go to school, parents interact with schools, you have leaders and professionals, you have businesses, and you have people that are supporting schools. And so that power to really coordinate and to align and to organize people really has the power to help us to become more efficient, equitable, and effective by how we distribute resources when we're deliberate. Furthermore, when we think about the community and using a school, we can think about how we create community-driven solutions that are local, that remove barriers. Because what our hope is, we want to think about really a systems change. We want the well-being of all people to participate, but the democracy should include everyone participating in that. That leads to equity and fairness, that leads to impact. The way of doing that is we think about cross-sector collaborations. Is that when we can create the conditions for how we will work together through policies, procedures, and provisions, now we create a path forward for how we can do the work, and also how we have tools and strategies for how we can work together. The other thing that I want to highlight, the goal of any system is not to keep people as beneficiaries. We want to move people from poverty to possibility. And when I say that is we want people to participate. While as an educator and having worked as an elementary teacher and now working at a national level, is that I used to say, those are my kids. Again, when I used to teach elementary, I'm like, those are my kids. But the reality is that those are not my kids. I may be a partner with the family that supports those children, but those aren't my kids. but how can I be a partner in supporting families, in a school, in a community? But I also want to make sure I'm deliberate and intentional to move from transactional relationships where I just do this to people to being transformational, that I do things with people, so that now people see that they play a role in creating the condition that we want to see in community. Now, when we think about community schools, it really is more than just a talk about moving from a program to a strategy. It really comes with what we call an essential framework for transformation. The stars to know were really where we were for about 15 years, where we thought about integrated systems of support, where we think about the mental, physical, and well-being of a child. We also think about powerful student and family engagement, thinking about how to bring families into the building, but also what are the things that we can help support the family in developing the strength in order to participate. Collaborative leadership and shared power, where principals, advisory boards are also advocating for schools, but parents are learning more about how schools operate, because oftentimes we look at schools from our own lived experience without recognizing that we have to move beyond antiquity to really this idea of transformation by learning. Also, the other part is thinking about expanded and enriched learning, where we think about learning as a continuum: before school, during school, after school, weekends, summers, vacation. That schools, learning should be a part of an evolving process. It's never only in the context of a school, but everyone plays a role in the learning and thinking about how they do that. Two things that we added was creating a culture of belonging and safety. We know that when kids can come to a school, or when teachers can teach at a school, or when leaders can lead a school where they feel like they belong and feel safe, we know that we create a space where people care. We also know that rigorous community-connected curriculum is also important. Is that while we may buy curriculum, is that how does it connect to the community? And so this framework allows us to always keep students at the center, where all students flourish in thriving schools and communities, to thinking about the orange and who plays a role, to thinking about the gear, about why it's important to develop trusting relationships, a shared vision, inclusive decision-making, and actionable data, to really the essential framework, to understanding how we do this together by really a rubber band that connects shared governance, continuous improvement, data systems, professional learning, partnership, and sustainable resources. So this just gives it a little bit more detail. Again, we will share these slides, but the idea is always to provide infographics that we're not talking at you, but really thinking about how this is working across our country, but even more how this can work across the globe. So I want to just double down on the idea of collaborative leadership. So when we think about schools and community schools, the idea of a community school is really people coming together around things that matter. But it's also about how we build collaborative structures for how to convene people. And so what makes a community school different is it has a lead agency. So sometimes it could be a school district, sometimes it could be a nonprofit, sometimes it could be a university, but someone serves as an intermediary that comes between community-wide leadership and school-wide leadership, because we know that people care, but sometimes it's hard to come together. And so when we think about a community school, it has a lead agency that will plan, coordinate, and manage relationships, but they will also help to set key roles of vision, policy, and alignment in order for us to function in a different way. And again, this is not new, but we try to think about it as how do we create a science around how to do things in a certain way. Let me hurry up to get through the time. So who plays a role in community schools? Let me be clear, everyone plays a role, because each group brings a unique set of experiences and resources to achieve a shared vision. And so you see residents, community partners, county and city government administrators, higher ed, because even as Dr. Donnie Hale, I'm still a parent to Chloe and Donnie Hale, two young students in school. I'm also a husband. I also work. And so I bring all these different realities to a building. The idea is, how do I unpack them to be of service to other people, as opposed to only serving as a professional, when the reality is that I can sometimes be a mentor, I can be a coach, I can be these other things. So the idea of a community school is thinking about what are the resources that we have in order to come together. And so again, excited about future questions and thoughts. But again, Miriam and Alicia, Thank you so much for allowing us the opportunity to have this conversation.
Thank you, Donnie. That was a wonderful also presentation and very thought-provoking, I'm pretty sure. And I could see the links of what Kirsten said and the whole school approach, and then Donnie talking about the community schools. I think you're talking about the whole school approach as well, in
Yes,
terms
that's
of
exactly.
connecting with different terminology. So that's wonderful. So yeah, so we're gonna have some minutes to open the floor for you participants who are here, who have been listening to Kirsten and Donnie. I don't know if they, Kirsten, were you able to see some comments in the chat about your presentation, so you can refer to that? And is there any one of you who would like to make a, you can raise your hand or let us know. I haven't checked the, but someone wants to ask a question. But before this, Kirsten, were you able to see some comment that you want to highlight while we give some time to Donnie to breathe?
I'm not seeing any direct comments directed to me, but I just wanted to congratulate Donnie on the community schools model, because so much of what you were saying, I was just sitting nodding, because so much of what you said resonates with what we're doing here in Scotland, this idea of place-based action that's based on the needs of the community, and this idea of your community as an asset that brings multiple hats, multiple identities to the mix. And just in terms of, I was having a quick look at what Chris has been doing at Avonwood School and just seeing the synergies there as well. So it's great to know that this transcends cultures, boundaries, borders internationally, to be a global mindset. It might be called different things, but it's a rose by any other name. And it's lovely to see that synergy and that sort of communality of approach. It gladdens my heart.
Well,
That's
if
wonderful.
if I may follow up with that, I think you're so right, Kirsten. Is that much of this work is being done? You know, like we are really, I think collectively across the world, people are coming together, recognizing that let's stop asking for more money, but let's think about how we come together in order to really build a collective strategy around things that matter. But then it's also helped to my word for this season of my life is let's restore breaches and build bridges around things that matter. Because we know that our world needs healing. And while we can be really smart and understand trauma, is that can we create solutions around healing where people are coming together around things that matter? So yes, thinking about high quality education, healthcare, housing, public safety, economic development, but also thinking about how we create solutions that demonstrate that we can work together and that we can build bridges.
Wonderful. Okay, so we have two hands, Almoatas first, and then
Hi, I
Bjorn.
just want to
If
say
you can also introduce yourself, where you are, etc.
yeah, I speak from Oxford in the UK. I'm associate professor at UCL. And I just have one question. First of all, I'd like to thank both the presenters, for these great presentations and for laying out this kind of structure, which is really helpful, whether it is in Scotland or in the States. My key question here is about what sort of challenges you think, the framework which we've seen, the institutional setup and the collaboration and, all of these things are great. But when it hits the ground, there are always, some sort of, challenges and problems. So what do you think the key challenges you faced, whether we're talking about working in Scotland or working in the state in terms of collaboration with the community, the diversity of the community, how you build bridges with this kind of diversity of people, bringing people and working with people is really challenge. I've worked, on the ground, for so many years. I understand, the difficulty of working with people, so when you have this kind of wide variety of stakeholders working with you, this is really a major issue. Just to create the dialogue would take probably ages, years, not just months. So what do you think about this? I'd like to hear from both of you. Thank you.
Perfect. Kirsten, chivalry is still real, so we always have to defer to women. It's the age of womanism.
Is that SDG 5, is it? Equality. Okay. Yes. Oh my goodness, that is a huge question. Thank you for asking that one. So speaking with my educator hat on, as well as my national LFS hat on, the thing that we hear most is capacity, time, awareness of what learning for sustainability is, and seeing yourself in learning for sustainability. This is something that we come across again, that sustainability, there's still a sort of default setting for a lot of people that it's just about the environment. And we see particular disciplines, for example, saying, oh, that's nothing to do with me and my practice. Speak to the geography department, speak to the biology department, that's what they do. So helping people to see themselves in that, but also this idea of, when it comes to the whole setting approach, this idea of, as Donnie was saying, what matters to you and your setting? What are the actions, the needs, the opportunities of where you are and the community that you are part of? And how are you going to co-design the solutions to that? So the minute you introduce that aspect of co-design, working with people, bringing the young people into the mix, bringing the community into the mix, that's when the magic happens, because you have that sense of ownership, that sense of everybody working towards a common goal, and you start to see the impact it has on education. Things become more meaningful, more relevant, more timely, more participatory. You can contextualize your maths and your English and your language skills in activities that mean something, and you start to see engagement that's really powerful. But I suppose the last challenge is the sustaining of the sustainability. So often it depends on one key practitioner, one passionate individual. If that person moves on or their role changes, how do we make sure it's embedded enough to survive a change in personnel? So hopefully that gives a flavor of just some of the things we've discovered on our travels. But Donnie, you'll have more to add to the mix, I'm sure.
No, thank you so much, Kirsten. And I think you've said a lot. The thing that I'm going to add to the conversation is the idea of co-designing. And again, I'm going to sort of take a step back. I think so often when we think about this idea of facilitating change, we really professionalize the approach, and it's very exclusive. And so what we've learned is really creating a space of co-designing by really how we facilitate conversations. And so first I think about is, how do you bring people together? And then when you bring them together, you ask them, what's important to you? What's your vision for the community? What role do you play? What are the barriers that exist that will prevent us from working together? And what can we do next? And I'll tell you, after 20 plus years in higher education, where I did lots of presentations and I used technology, in the latter part of my years after 50, I do simple facilitation with sticky notes. I bring the pencils, I put chart paper on the wall, and I just get people talking about things that matter. Because the one thing that we all know, we know how to code, we know how to make sense of things, but what we got to do is get back to relationship building, getting people to talk about things that matter. Because if we can get people to talk, then like Kirsten said, we can get into how to think about systems. We can think about schools. We can think about community. We can think about resources, and we can think about sustainability. But the thing that we can't do that we will slow us down from moving forward, if people aren't talking, we can't do anything. And I guess for me is co-designing with people around things that matter, but making sure that there's space for them to contribute.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I think we're gonna go beyond a little bit, some minutes, because I know Bjorn, or I don't know, Bjorn, your hand is not up now. Do you want to? Yeah, go ahead, Bjorn. You wanted to speak.
Yes, so just again, thank you. It's Bjorn Heyerdahl. I'm sitting in South Africa at the moment. I'm an Earth Charter affiliate for South Africa. And just wonderful to hear how structured, how meaningful, and how integrated. And every one of these webinars I attend, you can just see an exponential evolution in these models. And to the Earth Charter, Miriam and Alicia in particular, the stalwarts there, my constant appreciation for your efforts and inspiration, which we're seeing. My question was similar to the one from the gentleman in Oxford, so thank you for asking, and thank you both for very eloquent questions around that, because we find very much that the issues, given the pressure on students to perform and excel, certainly in this area, that the time constraint of adding something and getting teachers skilled enough to integrate something as sophisticated and nuanced as the Earth Charter into each subject, and to massage it into mathematics and science and geography, and to have someone capable enough to hold that space for a while and to push it through is a very, very real challenge from our side. So my compliments to you both for doing extraordinary work over this period. It's very inspiring. I had one other comment, was on the physical structures of sustainability, which we've all heard you talk about, not to downplay it, but to balance it with all the other needs. Often there's a sort of a token solar panel that goes on the roof, or some small pot in the science class. Have you had any success in really manifesting sustainability in the environments, in these school centers or university campuses where there's life and biodiversity and food security, that then is linked as an outdoor or another classroom around which all these students can constellate and really see the sphere of life? So sorry, that was a long-winded question.
Kirsten, I can jump in. That right there made me excited. I'll tell you, Jordan, years ago when we first started doing community schools in Miami, we wanted to think about how we could connect learning to students, community, and to their culture. And so this particular high school had 5,000 square feet of unused space. But at the same time, we had students were underperforming. To your point of excelling, is that we saw some gaps in performance. And so we thought about how we can create a learning space for students to learn social studies, math, science, and career readiness by creating a food forest. And so that food forest had food items and different vegetables and fruits from different parts of the country. Miami, and especially Overtown, is a place of immigrant groups. And so the thought is how to take a learning opportunity and create a food forest that connected to place where they came from. Think about how we thought about reading, math, social studies, and career, and then also thought about workforce development. And so this food forest had over 50 different species of food that could be picked and harvested by students, that could be cooked in a class for them to learn around culinary science. And then we worked with a local chef that is actually a world-known chef. So Marcus Samuelson was also opening up a restaurant in Overtown. And so now we had chefs coming to see students learn about sustainable opportunities, and then it turned into job opportunities. So the idea was to take really a challenge and an opportunity, but to really think about how we created alignment to bigger things in order to create sustainability that lead to outcomes for student success.
That's wonderful.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
I don't know, Kirsten, do you want to add something about that?
Yeah, so I guess this is where this idea of the rich patchwork of examples comes in, but also, you know, admitting that it's not a uniform patchwork, that some places are not benefiting from the idea of the sustainable campus or the sustainable space in which to work. I've put a link in the chat to Scotland's National Learning for Sustainability Action Plan, because obviously with the 4 Cs being the framework that we're asking all schools to work to by 2030, campus is a big part of this. So what we're doing sort of, I suppose this national strategic approach is bringing together the bodies that are responsible for the school estate for the most part. So people like local authorities, people who are in charge of things like procurement at a local level for schools, people who look after aspects of learning. So some of our NGOs, our non-government bodies who support this kind of learning. So bringing them together to have those conversations. You know, Donnie mentioned this idea of connecting and conversing, and what we're trying to do is to bring together the people who hold the purse strings, who hold the planning strings, to say, right, how do we make this happen? But using examples of good practice that's already out there as a motivator, as a stimulus, as an illustration of what's possible. I've seen some fantastically innovative practice being done by schools who are in urban wastelands, who are, you know, surrounded by concrete. They've created little oases of sustainability with no money, through creativity and passion and drawing on local assets from local community members. Equally, I've seen some schools who are very privileged. They have fantastic outdoor spaces, they have fantastic indoor spaces, but who are just not doing anything with them. You know, they're blessed with a huge couple of acres of grass, and it's just grass. You know, it's not being used as a learning opportunity at all. So what we're doing at the moment is a lot of sharing, a lot of connecting, a lot of conversations around how can we make this part and parcel of the everyday for every young person and the teachers that they work with, but doing it in a way that's appropriate for where settings are, and pulling on expertise that's already happening to say, well, how do we do this? This setting's done it, and this is how they did it. So there's a lot of examples that I can share with people if they want to pick up with me afterwards. I've put my contact details in the chat. I'll do that in a second. In terms of videos, in terms of case studies that are being pulled together by schools in Scotland about how they're doing this. But I think coming back to this idea of there's no one size fits all, every setting is different, and we're seeing some really innovative approaches to the use of, for example, as I said earlier, the school canteen as a learning opportunity. You know, where is the food on your plate coming from? You know, what's the story of that, and how do you work with catering staff to make that part of the learning of the school day? So I think the question is, there are so many different ways of approaching this and so many different things that can be done. We're seeing some great stuff, but we know there's a lot more to do.
Okay, thank you so much. I think we're coming to an end of this webinar. I think, well, we reached our objective, which was to share, to learn, and to get inspired. And I think, at least from my point of view, that's what happened with me. Thank you so much. I learned so much from Kirsten, from Donnie, from your context, from your questions as well, your comments. And there's an opportunity to continue to be in touch. So it's great that all of you, also Chris Jackson, that brought Avonwood School here as well. So I encourage you to keep in touch. We are going to send you the recording of this, and with the permission of Kirsten and Donnie, they'll tell us if we have the permission to share their slides, and if so, we are going to include that in the email that we'll send to you with the recording. And well, and this is, I think, the message is very strong. It's like the solutions are there. We need to work together. We need to bring people together, try to have this shared vision. And I encourage all of you to also think about how the Earth Charter, you can use the Earth Charter with that. The Earth Charter can support this vision of bringing, of coming together in a shared vision for sustainability, for a more sustainable, just and peaceful world. So thank you so much for your time and your participation. And yes, please, we have more opportunities to participate. There's going to be another webinar, but it's going to be in Spanish on tomorrow at this time as well. So I'm going to put as well the link. If any of you speak Spanish, you're going to have that opportunity. And also, oh, sorry. And we're going to put this here. It's webinar tomorrow. And yeah, and if you are interested as well in capacity building on ESD, the online certificate program 2025, my colleague Maria put the link there. So thank you so much, and have a good night, afternoon, or good morning, like us here in Costa Rica. Okay, thank you.